Well, thanks for having me. I'll go right into the subject, circular economy. The concept of circular economy has moved into the mainstream within the last 2 decades, and it's seeing an upsurge in popularity and importance, both in academia, where the number of papers written is rising rapidly, but also on the political level, where we can not only see recognition of the concept, but also some implementation. The European Union, for instance, has passed its second action plan on circular economy in March 2020. And environmental organizations, research institutes, civil society organizations are all promoting that move towards a circular economy. So what's a circular economy? What are we talking about? Here you have a diagram representing the old model of a linear economy. So take, make, waste leads to a diminishing of resources in the earth and to a huge garbage heap on the other end. So the idea was to make that circular. And actually, we may be looking at two circles rather than just one circle. One circle for organic materials and another one for inorganic materials. So what is the difference here? Organic materials come from the biosphere. They come from plants, from animals, and at the end, they decompose. They turn into compost, into earth, and they nourish the biosphere from which new plants grow. So these are organic materials. They come from and they go back into a biological cycle. These are renewable resources, but also this is a cycle of life on Earth. These are living beings we're talking about, not just resources. The other cycle, inorganic materials, that's metals, for example. Now, those should be recovered directly from old products and directly be fed into the production process again. So the iron in an old product will be extracted and melted down. If you want to make a new product containing iron, you'll go looking for old products, recover the iron in them, and use that again to make new products. So our thinking on circularity has progressed over time, and it's progressing still. And it's expanding both in scope and in quality that we aim for within these circles. At the beginning, recycling encompassed only a very limited number of materials. And over time, these have expanded and they're expanding still. And so what are we aiming for? Well, basically 100%. That's the horizon. I'll just put that in here. 100%, what does that mean? We want to recover all materials. We don't want to recover only iron or only iron and copper. We want to recover all metals and all the rare elements in the earth. And secondly, we don't want to recover a little bit of iron or a little bit of copper. We want to recover all the iron and all the copper and all the materials. So it's all materials and 100% recovery rate for each material as the aim. And there's a third level at which we're trying to reach 100%, and that is quality. A lot of materials degrade over time. They not only corrode, but they get mixed up with other materials. And the more often they go through the circles, the more often they are reused, the more and more they get mixed up with other materials. There are traces of other elements in the material then, but these are unknown and uncontrolled traces. So for high performance products, you cannot use these materials because for high performance products, you need to know exactly what you have. You need 100% purity in your input material. Or if you have alloys, you need to know exactly what composition you have. You can't have traces of other elements in there that you don't know about. So we need 100% purity, 100% quality. In the organic cycle for biological materials, 100% quality means something slightly different. It means that the materials not only decompose, but that they decompose without any residue. So the resulting compost must be fit to go in the vegetable garden. There must be no toxic traces of anything, and there must be no components that do not decompose and that would accumulate in nature over time. So in recovery of materials, we're aiming for 100% in several respects, all materials, all of each material, and 100% quality. And a lot of progress already has been made in that direction, but there's still a lot that remains to be done. So what does that need, or what do we need to do in order to get there? So one thing we shouldn't be doing is this. Once plastic is in the ocean, it is very, very difficult to get it out again. It would be much, much easier not to throw it in the first place. Likewise, we should be doing this. Same principle. That's an open dump site, a landfill. If we throw all the materials together into one big heap, it's very difficult to get them out again. And in some cases, it's not possible at all. Think of paper, for example. You know what your paper bin looks like, the paper bin you have at home. It's not ugly, it's not disgusting, it's not a health hazard. It's just a box with used paper, and the paper is fine. It doesn't deteriorate, it doesn't degrade. And when it goes back into the paper factory, it has a high and predictable quality, and it's fairly easy to be reused in order to produce new paper. Now, if you think of a bit of paper inside this huge garbage heap over there, you would not only want to walk across it and dig around in it because it's dangerous and disgusting to work under such conditions, but also if you actually did manage to pull a bit of paper out of that heap, that would not be usable. It has been contaminated, it has degraded to such an extent that the paper industry could not feed it back into production anymore. It cannot be reused. It's too late. And the same thing happens even if to a lesser degree to other materials. So the lesson here is don't start thinking once you're standing in front of a garbage heap. Start thinking beforehand. Once it's a huge, big heap, it's too late. We have to start thinking early. And if we manage to start thinking beforehand, the situation that results will be much more pleasant and it will be much more efficient. We will save ourselves a lot of work, a lot of contamination, and a lot of trouble if we do things right from the beginning. So where's the beginning? That is one step towards the beginning. If you do not want materials to degrade and if you want to use them again with 100% quality, you'll set up an appropriate collection system. Instead of standing in front of a huge garbage heap trying to pull things out, it's much better not to throw them in. Don't mix them all up. Organic matter should be removed and composted. And then if you have clean paper or clean plastic, metal, glass, it does not stink, it doesn't grow bacteria, it can be stored and processed, it can be made ready to go into new products. I should say about this image, that image is symbolic. All the images I use are symbolic, but here I would like to point out specifically that the system we have at the moment is not likely to be the pinnacle of evolution. We're going to get better. We'll have new systems for collection, but I'm just using this because it's recognizable and it's a symbol for direction in which we're trying to go. This is where we're headed. It's not yet, we're not at the end. So, okay, if we have a clean, separate collection, then we can reuse materials, can we? Or is there still another problem? Well, there may be, because what is inside a product today? Actually, in many products that we're using today, we can rediscover one of the problems that we've just pointed out with respect to the ocean and to the dump site. A lot of materials are thrown in together, and it's hard, if not impossible, to get them out again. And that is true even if the products come in through a separate collection system. So if you have, say, a household that gives a mobile phone to a separate collection of IT equipment or a vacuum cleaner to a separate collection of appliances. Now, you have this product, and you know there are different parts in it. There's metal parts and glass and plastic parts. But what you do not know for the metal is what metal exactly, what alloy, what composition. You do not know for the plastic what kind of plastic, what additives in the plastic, because plastic is not one material. It's not made of plastic. Plastics are a large group of materials. And the basic chemical structure of one type of plastic is different from another type of plastic. So some contain chlorine, for instance, and others do not. And in addition to these differences in the basic chemical structure, you also have, on top of that, a number of additives in each type, in each plastic part. So you have colorants and stabilizers and fillers and flame retardants. So all in all, the chemical composition of one plastic part may vary considerably from one other plastic part. Now, if you do not know what plastics, what additives, what metal alloys, what composition of material you have, how would you create a 100% quality input for a new product? where you basically cannot. Again, too late. So what is thinking beforehand in this case? Where do we need to start? Product design. That is where we need to start. So we begin thinking about recovery of materials before we even begin to produce a product. Right at the beginning, when a product is designed, when it's determined how it's going to be produced, what materials will go in, how they will go in. It is here at this very beginning of the planning phase that designers need to think about not only how a product will be used, but what will happen to the product at the end of use. For instance, how will the parts of the product be taken apart again? How will the parts of the product be recovered or replaced by spare parts? We can prolong the life of a product and we can make it repairable. That again will be a huge gain in efficiency. Efficiency in terms of energy and resources needed and in terms of work hours. There, it's much more efficient to exchange only one part within a product rather than to undo and redo everything. So to come back to the mobile phone, if only the display is broken, change the display. If only the battery is broken, change the battery. But the phone needs to be built for that. It has to be possible to take single parts out. And that may mean screws inside the product rather than everything glued and melted together. So if that kind of thing is not designed in from the beginning, it's very hard to do it at the end because you can't. The possibility is not there. The possibility has to be designed in at the start. So the right to repair is a motto that has been propagated for some time in social movements. And it has been taken up also by the European Union in the last action plan. Right, so one thing is to design for longevity, for products that last long, and then also for products that can be repaired and parts that can be taken out. Another question is, within the parts, will we be able to recover the material? Will we get the metals and the rare elements out of a smartphone again? Now, I have to admit, smartphone is a tough example I'm using here. There are other areas and other products where we're already much closer to the goal. So, but by and large, we can say progress has been made in that direction, but there's still very much that needs to be done. And all of that needs to go in at the design phase. Afterwards, it's too late. You can't do it. If the possibility hasn't been designed in from the beginning, afterwards you're doomed. You can't do it anymore. Well, there's some things you can do, but there's a very strict limit. If the design is bad, afterwards, your possibilities are very limited. There's one more thing that I'd like to point out that needs to be put in from the very beginning, and that is documentation. Like I said, the people at the very end who are trying to recover the materials, they need to know what materials they have, exactly what's in there. And now at the moment, most of the products we use come from a global supply chain or global supply tree, really. You have loads of different companies that produce raw materials, and with the raw materials, one small part, and then the parts are assembled to a larger part, and the larger parts come together to form the final product. So you have this whole huge tree of lots of different companies that produced something that went into the final product. Now, all these companies, for their little step in the production process, ought to document what they're doing, what materials they use, and what's in the materials. And if all of that is accumulated, then at the end, for the final product, you have something like a product passport that says exactly what has gone in. So that again is something that's in the EU action plan as an idea, an exploration. It's not a finished system, but the intention is there to do such a thing, watermarks or digital product passport. And of course, information technology is a huge issue here, because that enables us to do this kind of thing, this huge amount of information over continents and over time. Maybe with a digital revolution, we'll be able to do some of that. Right, so with all of that, where have we got to? One insight was, don't start thinking once you're standing in front of a garbage heap. That is actually the historical evolution. A lot of thinking has started at that point in Europe and also in other world regions, but we see that really that is too late. Start thinking beforehand. Start thinking at the phase of product design and design products to make them long-lasting, repairable, use materials that are recoverable, and document all of that. And once you've done that, you can set up a proper collection system to collect for 100% quality and 100% quantity as well. Right, so here's the illustration again that I showed earlier. And there's 2 circles, and I'm going to put in a few more circles now, or inner loops. I'll just put them in here. So there is a hierarchy to these loops. And the innermost loops are supposed to be the best, the most valuable, the most important ones, hopefully the biggest ones. Every product should stay in the inner loop as long as it possibly can, and only when that possibility has been exhausted, you move on to the next cycle, you move outward, and you stay in the second loop as long as you possibly can, and only when that possibility has been exhausted, then you move on. So the innermost loop here is entitled reuse and redistribute. That means we use the product as it is for as long as we possibly can. If one person doesn't need the product anymore, it just goes to the next person, and then that person can use it and the next person, but the product stays whole. It's used as a whole product. If it needs to be repaired, it gets repaired. If that isn't possible anymore, at least you can reuse some of the parts of it, and you can use some parts in an upcycling process to make a different type of product, but a very high value product as well. Or you remanufacture, which means you use the good parts in the product and combine them with new parts. And then with that, you create the same type of product, but at the level, the highest level possible, like you have with a new product. And once you've done all of that, you reuse the parts that you can possibly reuse. And at some point that can't be done anymore. Only then you go to the outermost circle of recycling, of recovering the material. So in this vision of a circular economy, recycling is still a part, but it's the last resort. It's what we do at the very end. We try to do other things before that as often as much as possible. And only at the very end, we go into recycling of material. Right. So the diagram I show here, I've just drawn that up quickly myself. It's based on the butterfly diagram that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation uses a lot, which in turn is based on a cradle-to-cradle design protocol. I'll give the link at the end of the presentation if you want to look at the original version of that. It's slightly different from what I've done here, but they give a whole explanation on why they're doing it their way. So if you're interested, please do go and check out their butterfly diagram. Okay, so that was a very short introduction, and it has led, among other things, to the conclusion that we need design in order to make circularity possible. Now, we will also need structures in order to make it happen. Therefore, now I'll briefly look at some of the structures in our societies that will have to change as we transition towards a circular economy. Now, a first fairly obvious one is physical. We'll set up the collection systems, we'll set up factories that do the actual recycling, so there's a physical component to all of that. There is a strong component of technological innovation on a large number of areas. For instance, if we want to recycle materials, the processes, the methods that we use for recovering material, there's a lot of development there, and we need a lot of development because, some methods exist already, but clearly there's a lot of room for improvement there. And likewise, in terms of what materials go in the first place. At the moment, we're using a lot of materials that are not fit for a circular economy. So for example, with textiles, clothes, they may be made of cotton, which is an organic biological material, but then they are dyed with colors that are not fit to go into the biological cycle. So they can't be composted, because the dye in the clothes on the cotton is not suitable. So what dyes can we use? Same for printing of books and stuff. What materials can we use that are fit to be recovered in 100% quality or that can be released into the biosphere and composted? There's a lot of innovation needed. And that goes on like that through all the different areas of circularity. Right, so some physical infrastructure, lots of technological innovation, and lots of legal infrastructure. Our legal infrastructure will have to develop to enable this transition to a circular economy. It will create incentives and possibilities and also driving factors, push factors for this transition. I'll stick with the example of collection systems. In Europe, different countries have been experimenting with different types of collection systems, like what categories do we create, what materials do we mix together, which ones are collected separately, and why. So the European Action Plan envisages standardization and classification systems that are unified through different countries. And that is important for trading and for the development of a market. So if I have a company that wants to treat materials and create new raw materials, if there's a unified classification system, then I can take materials that have been collected in Germany and in Poland and in Belgium, I can put them all together in my plant and reprocess them. But for that, I need to know exactly what I get. So I need this classification system, what exactly is in there. And if it's the same that's in there from another country, I can use them together. So there will be some of that. And still an example on the development of markets for secondary raw materials. The EU Action Plan is trying to do something for that both on the supply side and the demand side. So on the one hand, there's a requirement what percentage of, say, plastics has to be collected and has to be recycled. So that creates supply of secondary raw materials made from plastics. Now they also do something to create demand, and that is there will be a requirement for companies producing new products to say, in this product, we're using at least this and this percentage of secondary raw materials, of recycled material. So with that requirement, you create demand for secondary raw materials. And since there will be both sides, hopefully, that will help the market develop. There will be lots of other things like more restriction on dangerous substances, requirements for energy efficiency, recyclability, all of that. Another example I'd like to mention that's also in the action plan is green public procurement. States are very large buyers. They're large consumers. They buy office furniture for ministries. They buy clothes for fire brigades, equipment for hospitals, buildings for schools, and lots more. So if all these purchases are made with criteria of environment and circularity in mind, that means it will create a large demand for circular products. Now that will help companies that produce circular products already, and it will encourage more companies to move into that field. And once we have lots of companies offering circular products, that will also make it easier for other consumers to buy circular. So in short, the whole market of circular products will develop. Now, another area clearly is taxes. They have a strong impact. And for instance, if taxes on employment are low and on energy and resource use high, then things like repair services will become more profitable, for example. So there's a large number of areas of state action and of legislation that will have a very important role to play in the transition to a circular economy. And some of those I've just mentioned as examples. There's another level at which structure may play a role. And excuse me, I'd like to give one example of business models. So at the moment, the economic system as it's currently set up has a structural component that reproduces the problem. And that is individual enterprises make income from sales. And if they don't sell, they can't survive. So they try to sell new products as much as possible, as often as possible. That kind of current business model is well attuned to a throwaway society. They push out a large number of products. that get thrown away relatively soon and replaced by new products. That even leads to phenomena like planned obsolescence. Products are meant to break down or become unfashionable in order to make people buy new ones. Now that is an inbuilt incentive structure that goes in the wrong direction. And how can we turn that around, make it go in the right direction? How can there be a system component that pushes businesses towards long-lasting products, towards higher quality and lower quantity? Now, here's one business model that's being discussed very much in the context, and that is a business model that is based not on selling products, but on renting them out. For instance, a car business. In that model, instead of selling cars to people, a company would rent them out. It could be a classical car rental service, or it could be a flexible car sharing pool, or any other system. But the essential point is the car remains the property of the company. The people driving the car do not own it. They use it, but they don't own it. The company owns the car. And that also means the company takes care of repair and maintenance. It also means the company benefits economically if the car lasts for a long time. If they can rent out the same car for a large number of times over years and years with only a minimal amount of repairs and upgrades necessary, that is good for the company. Now, this type of business model is often referred to as a service model or as product as a service, because the company offers a service like a car rental service instead of selling a product like a car. It's also called access model because the consumers get access to a car in this case, rather than ownership of a car. Now, this type of model could spread. Not only could it spread to cover, let's say, 90% of all cars, of all car use, but it's also being experimented with for other things, such as office furniture or clothes even. You could also rent a service of having good light in your office rather than buying lamps. So the service model could spread to a large number of areas that we're not used to at the moment. And the idea behind it is to have an incentive structure in the system that encourages companies to go for products that last long, that can be repaired, and that can be upgraded. So, one more thing we'll need is culture. Circularity will need changes in our cultural infrastructure too. In lifestyles, in everyday practice, in our perception of what is normal behavior or how things can be expected to be organized. Even starting with this last example, renting clothes and renting furniture instead of buying them, that would be a new habit. Same is true with the 100% quality collection of materials. Now, where I live at the moment, it is a cultural habit not to throw garbage onto the street or into your neighbor's garden. Instead, you throw it into a garbage bin. And that is considered the appropriate form of behavior, and most people do it most of the time. And in future, this normal, proper, most widespread form of behavior could be to go for clean, separate collection. Like reusing products, repairing products, rather than throwing them away and then go shopping, that also needs a cultural foundation. At the moment, the throwaway society is deeply embedded in everyday habits, individual as well as collective, and it reaches down to levels such as the idea of what a good life is and where happiness comes from. There will be changes in all these levels as we move towards a circular economy. Some actors within the field of circular economy are very actively promoting such cultural changes and changes in everyday practice and in the deeper belief systems behind them. For instance, the zero waste movement. That's a social movement with a large number of people involved, many of whom focus on the individual level, on how a person with a Western middle-class lifestyle can stop producing garbage. There are a large number of blogs and social media channels dedicated to telling of personal stories and to giving concrete tips as to how to do it. So these people are very active in promoting lifestyle changes, new everyday practices, new ideas of what is normal behavior, and also new ideas of what gives one status in a society, what makes you cool. It's new ideas of what a happy and fulfilled life looks like. And these subcultures, they can provide a niche, an example, and a support group for people trying to move in a new direction. That the zero waste movement is also linked to movements with different tags, such as minimalism. That is a strand that is very directly propagating a change in values and in perspective. They are promoting the notion that people will be happier if they declutter their lives and get rid of all the stuff that is weighing them down and look for inner wealth rather than more and more consumer goods. Now, I would say minimalism is a related movement. I would not directly subsume that under the heading of circular economy, probably. But anyway, the zero waste movement I would consider part of the circular economy field. The lifestyle aspects promoted in there are directly relevant to circularity of resources. And also zero waste is not only a lifestyle movement. The national NGOs in that movement, they have activities and publications on other structural levels, such as industry or politics. So anyway, the area of cultural change of lifestyle habits is one where the differences between different actors in the field of circularity economy begin to show very clearly. The differences become very visible when we're looking at the field, at the category of reduce. You may have heard of the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. And you may have seen illustrations, like this one. This pyramid is a very common form of representation, and there are a number of variations on it. It's often been expanded beyond the original 3 R's, so I've got 4 here, but there's also variations of this pyramid with 10 or 12 categories where people differentiate much more finely and sort of point out what exactly goes in there. But anyway, the important aspect here is this is a hierarchy. The categories on top are supposed to be the best, the most important, the most desirable ones. And they should be the largest ones, not only in this diagram, but in the reality of our societies. Now, if you look at this again, you'll basically see that the category reduce is not even drawn in. The innermost circle, again, a hierarchy, the innermost circle is the best, hopefully the largest one. The innermost circle here is reuse. So if you have the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, the first one, reduce, isn't even mentioned. Now it's not mentioned in here, in this thing that I've just done, but it's not mentioned in the original butterfly diagram version of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation either. And indeed, if you look at the publications and the talks coming from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, there is not much on reducing consumption. And likewise, the Cradle to Cradle people who've done a lot as well for a move towards a circular economy, they don't talk much about reducing consumption. They give more, at least at the beginning, I think many of their statements sounded more as if we could go on consuming once we have circularity. We can use as many cars and planes and plastic bags as we like because anyway it's circular, so the resources will go around and there's no harm done. And also, to go back to the EU action plan, that doesn't say anything much about reducing consumption. It has something to say about creation of jobs and a competitive economy and GDP growth. It doesn't really say that the consumers should change their habits in the sense of reduction. They might have to change their habits by renting rather than buying, that sort of thing. But using less is not something that the EU is really talking about in that action plan. Now, that raises the question whether all this circularity of resources will, in the end, bring our societies within the limits of the planet, whether energy use per person will go down and will go down enough, and will the resource use per person go down enough? The EU action plan has no targets on where resource use per person should go to. There are other targets with numbers on them that say what percentage of waste should be recycled and so on, but not for the overall result of reducing energy use per person or reducing material per person. So you could say, of course, that in a circular economy, resources are being used without being used up. So one could argue in a certain sense that the availability of resources, of materials, becomes infinite. The same material can be used and used again 1,000,000 times over. True, but each move around the circle consumes energy. So if you imagine collecting products, sorting them, melting them down, producing new raw materials, and then new products from those materials, all of that takes work and time and energy. Also in the biological cycle, that needs acres of land and it needs time for plants to grow. If the circle goes around too quickly, nature cannot keep up. If the recycling of inorganic materials happens too often and too quickly, energy production and recycling work cannot keep up. So the cycle needs to be slow and small, because we will still have to fit inside the limits of the planet. So maybe it would be possible to integrate that into this illustration as follows. Yeah, the whole thing has to be small enough to fit inside the planet. So the circles will have to be small enough and slow enough. Now, how small is that? Or how slow? I don't know. I do not know to what point exactly future development will take us. But I do know that right now we are way beyond the limits, especially with this Western middle-class lifestyle. And I know that at least for this period of transition before us, we need to make every effort possible to make the circle slower and smaller, because we have a very, very long way to go. And so I don't think we can afford to do just one step out of 10 possible steps. We need to do all 10 possible steps because we have such a long way to go. So I also think personally, there are a large number of possibilities. I can see much of the road that we can travel. But the question is, will we do it? It's not so much can we do it, but will we do it? So before I conclude, I'd like to say a bit more about the discursive field of circular economy and the conflicts and possible positioning within that. There are, as I've pointed out, some significant differences between the different actors in the field, between the versions of circular economy they promote. There is agreement on the basic features. It's not as if the concept of circular economy as such was unclear or disputed. There is agreement on the general traits. There are some areas where there are big differences, and that area of culture, of lifestyle, and of this reduce aspect are certainly areas where that becomes quite visible. And then there's another thing that happens, and that is that people who talk about circular economy, they also talk explicitly or implicitly about other things at the same time. For example, about the economic system, what they think it should be, what they assume that it will be. And some of the conflicts in the debates, I think, are due to a lack of clarity. I'll illustrate that with the debate about green growth and degrowth. Now, that's a very valid and important question, and actors on both sides. So we have a large social movement, a degrowth movement, and we have actors such as the European Union, which, for instance, in the action plan, quite clearly states its commitment to green growth. So these people have heated debates, and rightly so, but the debate, I think, is not about a disagreement about the need for circularity, because green growth will need circularity of resources if it wants to stay in the limits of the planet. And of course, degrowth will need circularity of resources. So in whatever model you sort of find yourself supporting, in either case, you'll have to say, we need circularity of resources. And then the degrowth people will have to say a lot about the reduced category, and the green growth people maybe not. So there's important disagreement, but there is agreement, I think, on the need for circularity. And it's a pity if that gets lost in the debate. Now, similarly, with other important political questions, such as what economic system do we wish to live in? Now, the vast majority of actors in the debate on circular economy, they operate within the conceptual framework of a market economy. They assume that the overall economic system is roughly set up as it is at the moment. However, if anyone had a radically different economic system in mind, I argue that the case for circularity would stay the same. Even if you had a centrally planned economy, you should have circularity of resources in that. Even if you have a commons-based economy, you should have circularity of resources. If you have a gift-based economy or an economy with much high-tech subsistence, whatever the form of the economic system is, the material resources should go around in circles. Same thing with other areas, social structures, political systems. You can have a circular economy in a democracy. You can have a circular economy in a dictatorship. That's just a separate issue. You can have circular economy with binary gender roles or without any gender roles at all. It's a separate issue. You can have a circular economy with a high degree of social justice or with a high degree of exploitation. So, indeed, talking about different economic and political systems, China is also a very important actor in the field of circular economy. There's a large commitment on the political level, and has been for some time, to aim for circularity. So, all of that shows that a large number of extremely important political issues are not answered automatically one way or another by the introduction of a circular economy. All these issues need to be addressed separately. Well, we need to be aware of them and do something about them actively. We can't just forget about them and concentrate only on circular economy or circularity. So I think it's very useful on a conceptual level to differentiate clearly what am I talking about. On the level of political reality, of course, these issues need to be addressed simultaneously. Of course, that is how societies are. All issues are present simultaneously and in an interrelated manner. So any change process as big as the transition to a circular economy will impact many areas of society. Certain regions, industries, groups of people will benefit, others will struggle. It's absolutely necessary to deal with the social implications of that change at the same time as we are progressing towards circularity of resources. So in that sense, it's absolutely appropriate for the EU to be talking about just transition at the same time as it's talking about circular economy. And ideally, the EU would look at justice and social rights not only within the EU, but internationally. Because our supply chains, our economic structures are operating on a global level, and the effects of a policy change will be felt by people in different continents. So, all will not be well automatically just because we have a circular economy. Even all environmental issues will not be well automatically. There is no saying that circularity will be enough to stop the extinction of species. Circularity may be one necessary condition for that, but it may need other steps in addition. And the same for climate change. Circularity may be a necessary condition, but in itself it may not be enough. Other things may be needed on top of that. So, in conclusion, what can we say? Our societies are facing a number of challenges, and I would say that an overall process of social ecological transformation is needed. And within that transformation, I would argue that circular economy is one essential element. It is one little stone in the middle of a larger mosaic of issues and of solutions. It's only one stone, one element. It is not the whole mosaic, and it should not pretend to be so, and it should not be expected to be so. It's only one element, and there will need to be many, many other elements. But at least I think it should be one element as this. It's one essential little stone in this larger picture. That's how I would see it. Well, thank you. I'll give you briefly the resources here that I mentioned, links.